The Forest Killer, the David Thabo Simelane story. In the small kingdom of Swaziland, forests that once provided sanctuary for local communities became sites of unspeakable horror. Between 1998 and 2001, David Thabo Simelane systematically lured women and children into dense woodlands where he would rape, torture, and murder them. His reign of terror claimed at least 28 confirmed victims, though authorities suspect the number may reach 45. This is the story of Southern Africa's most notorious serial killer, whose crimes would shock a nation. To understand the emergence of David Thabo Simelane as a killer, we must first examine the Swaziland of the late 1990s. The kingdom, with a population of just over 1 million people, was grappling with significant social and economic challenges. High unemployment, poverty, and the emerging HIV/AIDS crisis had created an environment where many people, particularly women, were vulnerable and desperate. Swaziland's traditional culture and rural lifestyle meant that many women traveled alone or with small children between communities, often hitchhiking or accepting rides from strangers. This mobility, combined with economic desperation, created perfect conditions for a predator who understood how to exploit trust and desperation. The kingdom's vast forests, particularly the commercial pine plantations owned by companies like Sapi Usuthu, provided countless isolated locations where crimes could be committed without witnesses. These same forests that supported the economy and provided employment for many would become the burial grounds for Simelane's victims. David Thabo Simelane was born in 1956 and raised from infancy on his aunt's homestead in a remote part of Swaziland, far from any paved roads. Born a Malangi, his father's surname, he was raised with the Simelane family name after being taken in by relatives. Simelane left school early, despite his uncle's attempts to enable him to attend secondary school. This lack of education would contribute to a life marked by crime, poverty, and social marginalization. By his own later testimony, he had developed a pattern of criminal behavior that would eventually escalate to serial murder. According to court testimony, Simelane had been sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for robbing and raping a woman. However, he served 15 years of what was initially a 20-year sentence at Matsafa Maximum Prison, indicating that his crimes were more serious than his later claims suggested. Simelane was released from prison in 1998, a man consumed by rage and a desire for revenge. He testified in court that after his release, he set out to seek revenge by starting a murder series. This stated motivation, revenge against society for his perceived injustices, would drive his systematic killing spree. Shortly after his release, the woman who had testified at his rape trial was found dead. Simelane was immediately suspected, and he went on the run using the alias David Ali Malanga. He later allegedly confessed to police that after this first murder, he started his spree of killings. From 1998 until 2001, Simelane operated under multiple aliases, including David Albert Malanga and Fefesa Yende. This use of false identities allowed him to move freely through different communities while avoiding detection by authorities who might have been looking for him. Simelane developed a systematic approach to selecting and victimizing women that demonstrated both cunning and predatory intelligence. He would target women who were traveling alone or with small children, often those who appeared to be hitchhiking or in need of transportation. According to police sources, Simelane would approach potential victims under the guise of offering employment or assistance. Many of his victims reportedly left their homes believing they had been found work by Simelane, making them willing to accompany him to remote locations. His method was both simple and devastatingly effective. Simelane would convince women to accompany him into forest areas, often the Usuthu pulp forest in Malkerns, under false pretenses. Once isolated from any potential help, he would reveal his true intentions. Once Simelane had lured his victims into the forest, his actions followed a horrifically consistent pattern. He would tie his victims to trees and sexually assault them, demonstrating the sexual motivation that drove many of his crimes. If victims resisted too much, Simelane would stab or strangle them with his bare hands. However, many of his victims were beheaded, either before or after death, indicating a level of sadistic violence that went beyond simple sexual assault or robbery. From a criminological perspective, David Simelane exhibited characteristics typical of organized serial killers. His systematic approach to victim selection, careful choice of disposal sites, and ability to avoid detection for several years demonstrated significant planning and intelligence. The combination of sexual violence, murder, and robbery in his crimes suggested multiple motivations driving his behavior. While revenge against society was his stated motivation, the pattern of sexual assault and the sadistic elements of his murders indicated deeper psychological pathology. Mental health professionals noted that Simelane's lack of remorse and casual attitude toward his crimes were consistent with psychopathic personality disorders. His ability to manipulate victims through false promises of employment showed sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Among his victims were several pregnant women whose murders represented not just individual crimes, but the destruction of future generations. The discovery of 4 babies among the remains found in the forest suggested that some victims may have been killed specifically because of their pregnancy status. Beyond the sexual and psychological motivations for his crimes, Simelane also demonstrated a clear pattern of robbery and theft. He systematically stole his victims' money and valuables, which he would use to participate in gambling activities. This financial component of his crimes revealed a calculating mindset that saw his victims not just as objects for sexual violence, but as sources of income. The combination of sexual sadism and material greed made Simelane a particularly dangerous and methodical killer. At his most recent known residence before his arrest, Simelane had been paying just $7 a month for a single room with 1 light bulb and no electrical outlets or running water. This impoverished lifestyle may have contributed to his motivation to rob his victims. The beginning of the end for David Simelane came in mid-March 2001 when shepherds searching for a runaway cow made a grisly discovery in the Usuthu Pulp Forest in Malkerns. They found human body parts scattered in the woodland and immediately notified the authorities. The discovery shocked local police, who realized they were dealing with something far beyond ordinary crime. The authorities quickly sought assistance from 6 South African forensic experts, acknowledging that they lacked the expertise to properly investigate what appeared to be a mass murder site. The sappy Usuthu Forest, once a spot where lovers would meet for romantic encounters, suddenly became a place of fear and horror. The discovery of the first bodies created an atmosphere of terror that left even brave men reluctant to enter the woodland areas. As forensic experts began their examination of the forest crime scenes, the true scope of Simelane's crimes became apparent. The thick gray mist and deep mud of the forest made the investigation challenging, but it also preserved evidence that would prove crucial to the case. The condition of the bodies revealed the systematic nature of the crimes. Most victims were found naked and mutilated, having been buried under thin coatings of dirt and pine needles. The advanced state of decomposition indicated that the murders had been occurring over an extended period. Evidence at the crime scenes showed that the women had been raped and decapitated. The children were suffocated, with some found with plastic bags over their heads. This methodical approach to murder revealed a killer who had developed a routine for disposing of his victims. The Simelane case provided crucial learning experiences for law enforcement agencies throughout Southern Africa. The need for international forensic assistance highlighted the importance of developing local expertise in handling complex criminal investigations. The involvement of South African forensic experts demonstrated the value of regional cooperation in solving serious crimes that exceeded the capabilities of smaller nations. This collaboration became a model for future cross-border criminal investigations. The case also emphasized the importance of maintaining comprehensive missing persons databases and establishing better communication between rural communities and law enforcement agencies. Many of Simelane's early victims might have been identified sooner with better reporting systems. As news of the forest discoveries spread, panic gripped Swaziland's communities. Women became afraid to travel alone, and families desperately searched for missing relatives who might have fallen victim to the unknown killer. The investigation team worked methodically to identify victims and establish patterns in the crimes. However, the advanced decomposition of many bodies made identification extremely difficult, requiring careful forensic analysis and comparison with missing persons reports. Meanwhile, Simelane continued to operate under his various aliases, apparently unaware that the investigation was closing in on him. His confidence and continued criminal activity would ultimately lead to his downfall. The breakthrough in the case came on April 25, 2001, when David Thabo Simelane was recognized at a supermarket in Nalangano by the husband of a missing woman. This chance encounter would end his years of killing and bring justice for his many victims. Simelane was arrested on a street near some of the burial sites, a location that may have indicated he was returning to revisit his crimes. This behavior, returning to the scene of murders, is common among serial killers who derive psychological satisfaction from reliving their actions. When brought to the police station by local officers, Simelane displayed a calm and collected demeanor that shocked his captors. According to one of the arresting officers, when told that he was being investigated for the deaths of women and children found in Malkerns, Simelane simply said it was him. Remarkably, Simelane confessed to the crimes immediately upon his arrest, without any apparent coercion from police. This ready admission of guilt suggested either a psychological need to take credit for his crimes or a recognition that the evidence against him was overwhelming. Following his confession, Simelane cooperated with investigators in a way that both helped solve the case and revealed the full extent of his crimes. He led police to additional grave sites in the forest, helping them discover a total of 45 bodies, including those of 4 babies. During his interrogation, Simelane demonstrated a disturbing casualness about his crimes. He confessed to wearing the t-shirt of one of his victims, indicating that he had taken trophies from those he had killed and continued to use them in his daily life. Building a case against Simelane proved challenging for Swazi authorities, who had limited experience with serial murder cases. The police and prosecution spent 5 years constructing their case, a process complicated by the death of both senior investigators, who apparently took crucial paperwork with them to their graves. 2 written confessions were submitted as evidence during the trial, one from the day after his arrest, and another taken 12 days later in front of a different magistrate. Though Swaziland's common language is Siswati, the confessions were written by a translator in English, the language used for police and court records. Because of the highly advanced decay of many bodies, Simelane was ultimately charged with 34 murders rather than the full 45 bodies that had been discovered. This legal technicality meant that some of his victims would never receive formal justice, though their deaths contributed to the understanding of his criminal pattern. During his trial, David Simelane was found guilty of murder in 28 cases and sentenced to death by hanging by Judge Jacobus Annandale. The conviction represented one of the most significant serial murder cases in Southern African legal history. Throughout the proceedings, Simelane showed no remorse for his actions, displaying the callous indifference that had characterized his approach to his victims. This lack of empathy reinforced expert opinions that he represented a continuing danger to society. When Simelane first appeared in public during the trial, he disappointed those who had expected to see a more imposing figure. As one Swazi writer described him, he was dark in complexion, with a broad forehead, average-sized bloodshot eyes, an apology for a nose, and a mouth that must have been carved with a pencil knife. Following his conviction and death sentence, Simelane's lawyer appealed both the verdict and the sentence. The case made its way to the Swazi Supreme Court, where it faced scrutiny regarding both the legal process and the appropriateness of the death penalty. In November 2011, the Supreme Court reached a significant decision regarding Simelane's case. While acknowledging that the trial had taken an inadmissibly long time, nearly 10 years from arrest to final appeals, the court confirmed the death sentence. The lengthy legal process reflected both the complexity of the case and the challenges facing Swaziland's judicial system in dealing with crimes of such magnitude. The case required expertise and resources that stretched the small kingdom's legal capabilities. Simalane's death sentence came at a time when Swaziland had not executed anyone since 1983, raising questions about whether the sentence would actually be carried out. The kingdom maintained the death penalty on its books, but had effectively ceased using capital punishment for nearly 3 decades. The case reignited debates about capital punishment in Swaziland and Southern Africa more broadly. Supporters argued that the scale and brutality of Simalane's crimes warranted the ultimate penalty, while opponents questioned the effectiveness and morality of state-sanctioned execution. The crimes of David Simelane had a profound and lasting impact on Swazi society that extended far beyond the immediate victims and their families. For a small, close-knit kingdom where violent crime was relatively rare, the discovery of a serial killer operating in their midst was deeply traumatic. The case shattered assumptions about safety and security in rural Swaziland. Women became much more cautious about traveling alone or accepting help from strangers, fundamentally changing daily life patterns that had existed for generations. The Usuthu Pulp Forest, once a place where people would venture for work, recreation, and romance, became a symbol of fear and evil. Even years after the crimes, many locals remained reluctant to enter the forest areas where the murders had occurred. The extensive media coverage of the Simelane case marked one of the most significant criminal stories in Swaziland's modern history. Local and international press followed the investigation, trial, and appeals process closely, bringing unprecedented attention to the small kingdom. The case became part of Swazi cultural consciousness, referenced in discussions about crime, safety, and social problems. For many Swazis, the name David Simelane became synonymous with evil and the potential for violence that could emerge from seemingly ordinary circumstances. International media attention also helped highlight broader issues affecting Swaziland, including poverty, unemployment, and social challenges that may have contributed to creating conditions where such crimes could occur. More than 2 decades after David Simelane's arrest, his case continues to influence criminal justice and public safety approaches throughout Southern Africa. The lessons learned from his investigation have been applied to training programs for police officers dealing with serious crimes. Modern technology, including GPS tracking and mobile communications, has made it somewhat more difficult for similar predators to operate undetected. However, the fundamental vulnerabilities that Simelane exploited, poverty, desperation, and social isolation, continue to exist. The case serves as a continuing reminder of the importance of community vigilance and the need for robust support systems for vulnerable populations, particularly women and children in rural areas who may be at risk from predators. The Simelane case exposed significant weaknesses in Swaziland's criminal justice system that had broader implications for the region. The 10-year gap between arrest and final conviction highlighted the need for more efficient court systems and better resource allocation for serious crimes. The death of key investigators during the case processing period, apparently taking crucial evidence with them, demonstrated the importance of proper case management and documentation procedures. This systemic failure could have compromised the entire prosecution. The case also raised questions about rehabilitation versus punishment in African criminal justice systems. While Simelane received the death penalty, his earlier release from prison after serving 15 years for rape suggested that the system had failed to recognize and address his continuing danger to society. The Simelane case occurred during a period when Southern Africa was grappling with various forms of violent crime, including political violence, economic crime, and gender-based violence. His systematic targeting of women reflected broader patterns of violence against women throughout the region. Compared to other African serial killers, Simelane's crimes were notable for their geographic concentration and his cooperation with authorities after capture. Unlike killers who operated across multiple countries or continued to deny their crimes, Simelane's confession and assistance helped authorities understand the full scope of his actions. The forest burial sites he used were reminiscent of other African cases where killers exploited remote natural areas to dispose of victims. However, the systematic nature of his disposal methods and his return to the same general area distinguished his crimes from more random or opportunistic killings. Among the 28 confirmed victims of David Simelane were women ranging from young adults to middle-aged mothers, many of whom were traveling in search of work or better opportunities for their families. Their deaths represented not just individual tragedies, but the loss of daughters, mothers, and sisters who were desperately trying to improve their circumstances. The 4 babies found among the victims serve as particularly heartbreaking reminders of the scope of Simelane's violence. These children, who had committed no crimes and posed no threat, were killed simply because they were with their mothers when Simelane struck. The pregnant women among his victims represented the destruction of future generations. Their murders eliminated not just their own potential contributions to society, but also the lives of the children they were carrying. Despite Simelane's confession and conviction, significant questions remain about the full extent of his crimes. His indication that he could lead police to additional burial sites suggests that more victims may remain undiscovered in Swaziland's forests. The possibility that Simelane may have committed crimes in other countries or regions has never been fully investigated. His mobility and use of multiple aliases raise questions about whether similar patterns of violence might have occurred elsewhere. The case also raises ongoing questions about the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs in African prison systems. Simelane's escalation from rape to serial murder after his release from prison suggests that interventions during his incarceration were inadequate. Today, the kingdom formerly known as Swaziland, now called Eswatini, continues to grapple with the legacy of David Simelane's crimes. The forests where he buried his victims have largely returned to their natural state, though locals remain reluctant to venture into areas associated with his murders. The case fundamentally changed how Eswatini approaches criminal justice, victim protection, and community safety. New protocols for missing persons investigations, better coordination with regional law enforcement agencies, and increased awareness of the potential for serial crimes all emerged from the lessons of the Simelane case. While David Simelane remains on death row awaiting execution, his crimes continue to serve as a stark reminder that evil can emerge from any society and target the most vulnerable members of any community. His systematic targeting of women and children represents not just individual criminality, but a broader failure to protect those who most needed society's protection. The story of David Thabo Simelane serves as both a historical record and a contemporary warning about the need for vigilance, proper criminal justice resources, and comprehensive social support systems. His crimes remind us that the price of safety is eternal vigilance, and that the protection of the vulnerable must remain a priority for any civilized society. In the heart of Eswatini's forests, where life once thrived, a predator carved a trail of silence and sorrow. The story of David Thabo Simelane isn't just about a killer, it's about the women and children who were failed by systems meant to protect them, and the forests that now whisper their names in the wind. If this story shook you, moved you, or opened your eyes, please like, share, and subscribe to Weird World Wonders. Here, we remember the forgotten, honor the victims, and uncover the truths history tried to bury. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and never stop wondering what else lies hidden in the world's quietest corners.